Guys, what's up? It's I'mStricken06.com, and today we're going to be discussing ratchets and sockets and all the different variations, combinations, and what they're used, how they're used for, and everything you need to know about ratchets and sockets. So when you're shopping around for ratchets or sockets, there's going to be three primary sizes. There's going to be a 1/4 inch, 3/8, and a 1/2 inch. And you're probably wondering to yourself, what is the difference? What do I need? Well, the anvil, which is that part right there that the socket attaches to, is going to be either this small, which is a 1/4 inch. It's going to be a little bit bigger, which is a 3/8 inch. Or it's going to be a little bit bigger than that, and it's going to be a 1/2 inch. And the reason why they sell them in different sizes is because they have different applications and specifications. So if you are doing like a very small project, and by small I mean putting together a little shelf or working on tiny little nuts and bolts, you can choose the 1/4 inch, which is that back part right there, or the anvil and the ratchet, and that will give you just enough torque and leverage on whatever nut and bolt that you're using to snug it up. I probably wouldn't go above 30 to 50 foot-pounds of torque on a nut and bolt using this style of ratchet and socket. If you're going any higher, I would suggest going up to 3/8. 3/8 gives you a little bit bigger of a ratchet already compared to this little guy here. Thus gives you more torque. It gives you more ability to crank down on a bolt. The sockets are a little bit beefier. You can tell just by the size how they get a little bit bigger. The sidewall can become a little bit more thicker on the 3/8 versus a little 1/4 inch. So this gives you a lot more torque and ability to snug up a fastener really tight without breaking these. These will break on you, and when they shatter, they can start sometimes shooting out little chunks of metal. Now, if you're really going to be working on, say, suspension parts in a vehicle or an axle or something that requires a lot of torque, you're going to want to go up to a 1/2 inch, a much bigger anvil on your ratchet. The ratchet gets much longer already. You can tell how big this is compared to a 3/8. It's just a much beefier head on it. For example, see that? How much beefier it is? This can supply a lot more torque when working on really big fasteners or fasteners that require a lot of power. These are impact sockets. We'll get to that in a minute. That's why it's black compared to the silver one there. These are really strong ratchets. They really allow you to supply a lot of power to the nut and bolt, either fastening it or releasing it. Say it's really rusted. You could easily break one of these. I have broken them. You can easily break one of these if the power that you're applying to the fastener is a lot greater than, say, whatever rust or something that's holding it on. So these are the three primary sizes: 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 1/2 inch. So keeping up with the ratchet topic, we have already discussed the fact that there's three size difference, and there's also the size difference on the anvil. The anvil, again, being this part right here. There's also different types of locking mechanisms that ratchets will have. Some won't have anything besides a little ball detent like that, and that's what holds on the socket itself. It won't fall off, and you can hear it's a nice positive click, and you don't need to do anything to release that. Some will have a button on the back, and that allows the ball to drop down. If you can see, the ball will drop down, and this will push out, and that locks into the hole here. Got to line it up. So this way, this will never come off until you push this button, and now that releases it. Some will have smaller buttons. Some will be a little bit more of a tighter grip, but that's how some ratchets will hold on to the socket for you, and while some won't. Some ratchets will also have the directional knob right here. So one is for tightening, one's for loosening. This is for loosening. You're going to turn it to the opposite direction. That will allow you to tighten it. Some will have a knob here to go either direction for tightening and loosening it. And some knobs will be a little bit more flush against the head than, say, something like that. You see how the knobs are much beefier and bulkier on some on some of the ratchets. I'm going to include this ratchet as well because it's a little bit different than these. These are all solid heads. This one actually allows you to bend the head of the ratchet. So say you're working on a really strange fastener that is an awkward place, well, you can go ahead and get at it in this format rather than having, say you don't have the clearance to do this, well, you can do it that way and still work that fastener loose or tighten it up. These are pretty useful. Some will have also an extension around here that will allow this to extend out, giving you more leverage. But this also comes with a drawback, is you can't lock this head down. So you might, be wiggling around with it. Instead of torquing the nut or fastener, it's going to be actually just flexing on you. That's where something like this, like a solid shaft, will be able to give you that torque that you need to snug up the fastener. Another thing to consider is some of them are a lot thicker than others. You can tell how this little guy is almost as thick as the 3/8, and the 3/8 is a lot smaller than the 1/2 inch. And this one is actually pretty much the thinnest one of all of them. So if you got a really large headpiece on here, it might not fit in the workspace that you need it to fit into. So you might want to invest in some thinner ratchets. They're a little bit more expensive because they need stronger metals to be a lot smaller, thus more expensive of a metal. But it can be a complete lifesaver when you're dealing with a really thin ratchet like that versus a really fat one like this. So the next thing you want to consider is sockets. What socket do you need based upon what you're going to be doing? Let's just stick to the anvil size for now versus any kind of other dimensions on the sockets. Like I said, these little 1/4 inch, they're good for really small jobs. Putting a shelf together, maybe putting in a very, very small like lag bolt into a wall stud if you're hanging a TV or something. Adjusting something small within the home, the 1/4 inch will do you just fine. If you're going to be doing any kind of work on a car, I'm going to go ahead and tell you to just forget about this for a second and go ahead and move on to the 3/8. The 3/8 will allow you to apply a lot of torque to a bolt, or any kind of fastener for that matter. This will be able to do a job this one certainly cannot. I've destroyed more of these than you can imagine. I don't think I've ever destroyed any of these. These are a lot stronger. And of course the 1/2 inch gives you the power that you can use to snug up just about anything on a vehicle. I mean, I don't think there's any bolts on a car, any car for that matter, that a 1/2 inch couldn't conquer or shouldn't be used upon. Even an axle bolt you can do with a 1/2 inch. Axle bolts can range from 100 to 200 to sometimes 300 foot-pounds of torque. A 1/2 inch will be able to conquer that like nothing. So the next order of business is we're going to discuss the different types of sockets that there are and advantages and disadvantages of pretty much everything. We have a long socket. We have a swivel socket. These will swivel into different directions. We have just a solid socket, and we have these chrome solid sockets. Now we're going to go ahead and ignore the anvil size on the back, and we're going to simply concentrate on the features of each type of socket. Obviously this one allows you to reach a fastener that's a little bit further away than you can get at. So for example, I have this one in 1/2 inch. It can reach a lot further of a distance. But the primary reason for this style of socket is if the fastener is actually sitting on a really long stud. You can't get it with this. If the stud is this long and the nut's at the back here, this will never be able to go on it because the back here is going to be clogged up with the ratchet. For example, like this. How are you going to get to the nut that's down here? Well, you're going to need a long socket in order to reach that fastener, which is at the base of whatever it is you're trying to remove it from. So these have an extreme advantage on a lot of strange different applications where the fastener is at the bottom of a really long, for example, stud. Swivel sockets. Swivel sockets have their place in a toolbox, but they can be a pain because they do swivel. They also reduce the torque that's being applied. So for example, you have here, every time there's a connection of any form, you're going to lose power because power has to be transferred versus one solid hunk of metal. Now there's two chunks of metal that are touching each other. Well, you're going to lose some power through here. So if you're applying 100 foot-pounds of torque, this is going to reduce it maybe 25, 30, 40, sometimes 50%, depending on how many connections you have. So you're going to have to apply that much harder force on the handle to get this part of it to turn the force that you need it to. But they can reach awkward places where something like this cannot. You know, maybe you don't have the ability to turn your ratchet like that, but you still need to get at this fastener. So if you can only turn your ratchet flat, but you need your thing to be turned, well, there you go. This allows you to stay bent and continue to turn a fastener like that. So they definitely have their place. They're really good on certain weird suspension applications where suspension on a vehicle doesn't have a lot of clearance in a lot of places, and it can really get tough to get a ratchet in there. A lot of people end up using like multiple flexi joints. These just do the job really, really well. I've never destroyed one of these yet, and I use some pretty powerful impact tools. Straight sockets, pretty self-explanatory. All of these are going to be straight sockets. They'll just change the game when you line them up. You can see how this one's a little bit taller than that one, and this one's a little bit taller than this one. The shorter the socket is, the more torque that it's going to apply to the fastener. You know, the longer a piece of metal is, the more that this is going to flex. You believe it or not, these do flex. If you're snugging up a really tight fastener or you're trying to release it and it's really rusted, you're going to begin to flex these, and they're either going to break or they're going to stay flexed and try to work with you. But generally, the longer a fastener is, the less torque is going to apply at the tip because it is flexing. So you don't always have a choice with the kit that you're buying. You know, when we're talking about millimeters, it's not that big of a deal. But sometimes a millimeter in a confined workspace can either make or break the job. If it only has this much of space and you're trying to shove this thing in there, it might not fit. It's just not going to fit. And that's, you know, the nature of the beast when you're working. So having multiple styles of sockets really helps. Sometimes when you look into a mechanic's toolbox, you're going to say, what do you need all these, you know, sockets for? Well, they all have their own individual job and their own individual characteristics that we need to get into a tight workspace. Sometimes you need to reach, sometimes you need to, you know, remain small within a confined work area. Now let's talk about different styles of extensions that bend. And by bend, I mean these will do virtually a 90-degree angle and still allow you to turn a fastener while being bent. They work similar to the swivel socket, but these can bend a little bit more. But the only problem is you have one connection, you have two connections, you have three connections, and then you have four. Four connections will lose a tremendous amount of power. If you are applying 100 pounds of torque by hand, by the time it reaches a socket, for example, let's do this combination right here. So you can only get to it at this angle, which is almost a 90 degree. By the time you are applying the torque on the fastener, this 100 foot-pounds of torque that you're applying here will probably be about 25 foot-pounds of torque, 50 foot-pounds of torque. That's a tremendous amount of torque loss. Because again, you have 1 point of contact, 2 point of contact, 3 point of contact, 4, and then 5. That's a tremendous torque loss. So some people don't like that. So what do? They also have a swivel socket extension. This allows you to have less points of contact. 1, 2, 3, and 4 in here. So it's one less point of contact. It has a little bit less of an angle that it can reach at, but when you really need torque to be applied to your fastener, having that one extra point of contact loss is huge, especially when you're using an impact. An impact will hit. It doesn't turn the way your hand will. Your hand just either is applying the torque or it's not. An impact hits. So every time it lets go, it's losing power. You know, and this thing has to flex with you. So it's a huge amount of power loss, but it also, again, like everything else, has a place in the mechanic's toolbox because you might need the extreme angle that this can reach that swivel sockets simply cannot. The next thing on the list is going to be extensions. These allow you to reach further distances without having to move any closer to your fastener. You can see you can put on a socket and reach a really deep area. For example, like spark plug channels, they're pretty darn deep. Some of them can get really, really deep. So you can reach a fastener without having to move your ratchet any closer to the workspace, because sometimes you just can't. So you have this right here. You also have a mid-size one. This will reach like a Nissan spark plug. It's not that deep. And then sometimes you just need a little bit more space. You know, you don't need a tremendous amount, just a little bit more. These smaller extensions work great in those applications. Also, you're going to have torque loss as well. The longer a piece of metal is, the more likely it is to begin to flex in either direction. So if you're using any kind of tools or your hand, don't be surprised that when you apply any kind of extension, you're going to lose power. You're going to lose torque. So it means you're going to either have to twist harder and use more muscle, or you might have to use your impact a little bit longer for it to actually create enough stress on the fastener to break it free. The next thing up on the list is going to be your breaker bar. It's basically a ratchet that is a lot longer. Some won't have a ratcheting feature. Some will. Like this one, for example. It can ratchet and it locks the head in either direction. Versus this one just swivels and there's no ratcheting features, just an anvil. So what these are good for? These are good for when you need a lot more torque. It's a lot easier to put your hand back here and apply a ton of pressure than trying to fight with something a lot smaller. You don't have as much torque on here. A lot of guys will put a pipe onto this, but the problem with this is this ratcheting feature inside just has a little tiny, clicker inside, and you can break this. There's 72 teeth in most of these, and they will break. This has no teeth to break. This is just solid metal on metal. So you have a ton of more torque ability to really get on a fastener and break it free because there's nothing to break. Here you can break this mechanism inside. So, it is possible. This one as well. This was kind of a spur of the moment purchase. It's a ratcheting one. It'll go either direction. I think mine's locked up. There it is. So it's got its place, but I certainly wouldn't use this on a high torque work job. I would use this because this has nothing to break inside. This gives me full torque. I do have a point of contact here, but it's still going to supply absolute ton of force compared to this, which can break the internals, and then it's just going to be free spinning. Furthermore, if you notice, the distance between the back of the tool to the front of the anvil is huge when you're talking about the difference. Because this has the ratcheting capability inside, it has to be a little bit longer compared to the one that doesn't have a ratcheting ability. This gives me a lot more clearance to get to whatever it is I'm trying to release compared to that. Take a look at the difference. That's huge. That's a lot difference. We're talking about ½ an inch of clearance, maybe even a little bit more. If you're working in a very confined workspace, you might not have that ½ an inch. So something like this will work. Again, you look inside of a mechanic's toolbox, you're going to see a lot of what looks like repetitive tools, when in fact the differences in them are massive. And guess what? There's going to be that one job you need to get at, and you can't do it because you only have one of the tools. So if I was to be honest with you and to purchase one breaker bar, it would be the non-ratcheting one, simply because it has a smaller clearance here, there's less things to break on it, and they're probably cheaper than their counterparts with the ratcheting action and the larger clearance here. So you are probably wondering, what is the difference between the colors of the two? Why is one chrome, one is black? The biggest difference between the two is this is rated for an impact gun, either air or electric, and this is rated for your hand, meaning it is only really designed to be used with a hand ratchet. It is not designed to be beat on by an impact tool. These will shatter, and they will shatter really quickly, and they go into a lot of little pieces. These are designed to be a little bit more flexible, so they will work the way an impact works, which is, hammering action. They will take it and flex with it. These are a lot more rigid. They are a lot more stiff and hard. So any kind of impact action from one side can send this thing shattering. It is not designed to be used with an impact gun. I will do that at times. A lot of mechanics will, because some of these sets, and I'll get to this in a minute, will be skipping numbers. For example, this is a 12 millimeter, this is a 12 millimeter. Some will skip 13, go right to 14, because 13 is not so much of a popular size. But if you only have one to use and you need to finish a job, sometimes you risk a little bit of danger in order to finish the job. But that's the biggest difference between the two, is this is designed for an impact gun, this is designed to be used by freehand. So as you heard me mention before, some socket sets will skip sizes. This one in particular, 10, 13, 14, 15, 17. What happened to 11? What happened to 12? What happened to 16? They just didn't include them because they're not as popular of a size as all these other fasteners, which sucks, because if you have a 12, you're not going to get it. Not at least with this set. Some brands, like Sonex, I think, they will go straight down the row and include every single size. So that can be helpful. You have to know that in advance, that when you buy a socket set, you might be missing numbers. And a few weeks, a few days, a year down the road, you might get a socket size, or you might get a fastener size that's going to be a 12, and none of these will fit it. You're going to need a 12 somewhere along the line to get onto that fastener, which sucks. So you might be doing it with a crescent wrench, you might be doing it, you might go out and have to buy a size 12 to add to your set. But along those lines, you really can't go wrong with what's available, as long as it's a major brand, as long as they offer lifetime service, a lifetime warranty on them. That's just the nature of the beast. They're going to skip sizes. To shop around for the perfect sets that don't skip any sizes, you're generally going to be paying through the nose for major brands, and the kits will be smaller. They won't range from, say, a really small size to, say, a massive size. Like, say, this kit came from a size 10 to a size 32. I mean, you can see the difference. It's massive. These are going to be the more popular sizes in a car. So, I bought it, and if I ever do need something, generally I research a project before I begin it, so I know what fasteners I'm looking for. I'm looking through the field service manuals to see the socket sizes, and if it's a strange socket size I don't have, I go and buy it really quickly, and then I tackle the job. But sometimes you're just stuck, unfortunately, having to either run out to a store and buying that size individually, or doing whatever you got to do. So there's also going to be a difference between metric and standard, or some will call it SAE and standard, or something like that. Basically, it will go from a size 32, and its counterpart's going to be 1 1/4. They're going to be extremely similar in size, but there will be a very slight variation. It's almost impossible to tell with the naked eye, but you will feel it when you put it on a fastener. One's going to feel nice and snug, and it's not going to move, and the other one's going to have a little bit more play. It's going to fit, but it's going to have a little bit more play. So I suggest having one of each, going with, say, like a millimeter and like a European style number, because there are going to be differences at times. You'll run into sometimes a nut that is just really rusty, and it was a 32 or it was 1 1/4, and now you need a little bit more clearance on it. Well, the slightly larger size will fit it a little bit better. So the next thing is going to be a completely different style of socket. These are Torx, and these are Allen heads. These look like a little stop sign. think that's a stop sign now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's not a stop sign. Stop sign's 8 sides. And then these are star bits, Torx, I believe they're called. I have T30 all the way up to T70. I needed this one to release a seat. I took a couple seats out of a car, and they were this weird style bolt. This one I use for the drain plug on a rear differential. If you got a rear wheel drive or all wheel drive car, it's either going to be a 1/2 inch, just like straight this right into that hole, or it's going to be like a weird Nissan uses a size 10 Allen head. These are really not meant for impact because, again, we're dealing with a chrome finish here, and these are actually 2-piece, while these are rated for impact. They are black and they are one solid piece. They're not pushed into individual sockets like, say, these are. You can tell these have been pushed in there. They do fall out all the time. These are solid pieces. These you can use with an impact gun. Also worth keeping around just in case you ever do get into some kind of really strange scenario where you need a Torx bit. Torx also has a security Torx bit. See how the tops of these are solid? These security bits will have a hole inside if you're like a pin, and that's designed to line up with the fastener. That's so like people can't, I don't know, take things off. Usually like fences, and it's weird, but bathroom stalls and in like businesses, they'll have Torx security bits that lock the walls up. Like, how many people walk off with a freaking bathroom stall wall that's been graffitied up? But anyway, yeah, so this is also Stylus sockets that you will run into if you work on a car. Not so many of this. You will find quite a bit of this stuff. I keep these around, and I'll just work it by hand like that, and it can get in. These wear really easily. They're really sometimes a pain in the butt. Either this will wear or the fastener that you're working on will wear, but they're really not meant for high torque applications. These 3 things here, I have plenty of these, but I just grabbed the first 3. These are interchanges. This will take, for example, a 1/2 inch tool, say like this ratchet here, and it will give you the ability to use a 3/8 inch socket. So unfortunately, it adds length to everything, but if you have this 1/2 inch ratchet, you'll never be able to put it on a 3/8 inch socket. So you're going to need an interchanger that allows you to put it on and use it. Also, there are 3/8 inch adapters that will go on a 3/8 inch ratchet and allows you to don a 1/2 inch tool. Where's my 1/2 inch tool? Here we go. A 1/2 inch socket. So now we went from a 3/8 inch ratchet to a 1/2 inch socket. Likewise, you can do a 3/8 inch ratchet, and it will allow you to don a 1/4 inch socket. Again, they do add length, unfortunately, but when this is all you got and it works, you use it and you thank the Lord for having these interchangers. They go pretty big. I had some that go up to 1 inch. I mean, they're like massive, like this big. So you can do like a 1/2 inch to a 1 inch socket, a 3/8 to a 1 inch. They do a bunch of crazy variations. I have these. I use them. You can tell mine's pretty used up. You know, sometimes, you know, you have to play variations with these things because not everything always works out the way it's supposed to. Sometimes, you know, for example, if you don't have 2 sets of each socket, well, guess what? You're going to be having to interchange between a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch. So you know, sometimes you got to work the nut and the fastener at the same time. And if you don't have 2 size 16s or 2 12s, you're going to have to unfortunately use a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch together through an interchanger. And last but not least on the topic list is going to be the Stylus socket that you can see inside. This is a 6-point socket. I think this is a 12-point socket. You can see inside, it looks like a star, and this looks like a 6-point, you know, 6-point stop sign, if stop signs were 6-pointed. They will both fit normal normal fasteners, but these strip really fast. I cannot express that enough. Avoid these like the plague. Always get 6-point sockets. They apply more torque to the sides and points of the fastener. These do not apply enough. These strip out nuts like I cannot even express to you. Avoid these like the plague. In fact, I had to dig deep in order to find this hunk of junk somewhere in the garage. I hate these. I don't know why people keep buying them. They do have a place for very small fasteners. If it's rusted or if it's been on outside, avoid them. Always go for the 6-point sockets. They are a lot more useful and apply a lot more torque. Alright guys, so I hope you learned something today. You can reference this video in the future if you are shopping for ratchets or sockets or sets. A lot of people ask me, hey, is buying a set a good idea? And I'm going to tell you yes, but I'm not going to tell you that buying a set that includes a free ratchet is a good idea. Only buy that set if it's really, really on sale, because they typically include really cheap, flimsy ratchets that have something called a pawl inside of here. It's like this little tooth that grabs on as the star-shaped thing inside spins. You can hear it. They're typically really cheap ratchets that they include. Even if it's a name brand, it's still going to be like a not in-house name brand. It's going to be like a third company that makes them and stamps the name brand on it. If you're going to want to buy a decent ratchet, you're going to have to spend some money. Some of these larger half inches, they'll be 20, 30 bucks. 3/8 will be like 15 to 25. This is my Husky. I've used it for close to 10 plus years. Never any problems. I just simply take it apart with these little star screws here. Take it all apart and lube it up like once a year. Harbor Freight, believe it or not, sells some decent stuff. You know, stuff like this is going to happen to it if you beat on it. But they will go through a lot of abuse, and they're serviceable. See the little screws right there? You can take this whole mechanism out and lubricate it once a year and you're good to go. These cheaper, this is Companion, I think. They have some kind of really strange snap ring in here you got to take apart and this whole junk falls out, but also serviceable. They all have lifetime warranties, Harbor Freight as well. So if you're going to buy a ratchet from them, that's fine. You know, lifetime warranty, you break it, you bring it inside, you get another one for free. You can't beat that. Versus having to chase down a tool truck. I'm not going to name any names, but I had a tool truck that used to come around and really expensive stuff. And guess what? He stops coming around, and good luck finding one. You know, I like a store that I can walk into and just say, here's your junk back, I want a new one. And I walk out with a new one. I don't want to chase down any trucks. I don't want to call anyone and beg them to come to the work site and say, hey, can you, exchange this? They typically don't even want to deal with that. They want to make sales. They don't want to make returns. So they avoid you. And that's why I don't like about tool trucks. Furthermore, there's always like this fight about, oh, this tool truck's better than that tool truck. Guess what? They're all mostly coming from the same country of origin. They're all mostly using the same type of metal. Chrome vanadium or whatever's the other one, chrome, I don't know, chromoly or something like that. So you're going to be getting very, very minor differences when you're dealing with sockets, extensions, and ratchets. This whole fight about which one's better than the other. It's like people arguing Ford's better than Dodge. I mean, it's the dumbest thing. If you go and buy a Craftsman, I know they're in China now, I think. They're not longer actually American. Or if you buy Harbor Freight, they're going to last you. And if not, you walk into the store and exchange it on your day off, and boom, you're off and set. You're not chasing down any tool trucks. Also, there's a lot of weird sockets out there, in a sense where they do this. Watch. They will fit like 4 different applications. This was a socket I used on my race bike to change out axle nuts, because axle nuts, they're not a protruding male socket or a fastener. They're an internal female, so you got to actually stick it inside in order to turn it. So if I don't typically tell you to stock up on these, because odds are you'll never need it. It's a really strange application that you will need a male ended socket versus, say, like a female ended socket. This is a female socket. This is a male socket. Really strange application. But I have these for certain different jobs. Like I said, this was on my race bike, so I still have it. Would I recommend getting gigantic sockets? Probably not. Like here's one that I needed for my race bike. It's a size 36 millimeter. It's massive. It was only available in the star shape. And since I didn't use an impact gun on the rear axle, I did everything with a torque wrench. I was fine with getting a star shaped. It fits a 3/8. I don't know, this is 1/2 inch, I'm sorry. It's a huge socket, massive. I don't suggest getting anything above like 32. Unless you're already starting to work on cars, like axles and suspension parts, then you're gonna run into those larger 32, 36 millimeter sockets. Otherwise, you know, the general Harbor Freight kits are really good sets. I've yet to break a single Harbor Freight socket or ratchet. I did break one of these though, unfortunately. But you know, listen, that's kind of a given when you're dealing with a flexible joint like this. They will destroy themselves, especially when using really large impact guns. This is my Milwaukee. It's 1,100 foot-pounds of torque, which is freaking godly beastly. So yeah, thanks guys for watching. It's Stricken06 of Stricken06.com. Visit my website. On my YouTube channel, I also have all my Milwaukee tools that I use as a mechanic. I have them listed on there. And yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe. See you.